Hello! We are live for Shalom's Art. So I'm on, I guess, right on time. I was going to be on early, but we are on. And so I'm really glad you're here. Today we're going to be painting this little succulent. And so I guess you're probably here for two reasons. Maybe you want to learn, or maybe you're just wondering what this watercolor party business is about. But anyway, if you're new here, my name is Shalom. I love watercolor, very, very, very passionate about watercolor. And I'm really excited to paint with you today. If you have any questions at all during the lesson, go ahead and type them in and I'll do my best to answer them all. This is the first time I've done a live event on social media, so it's going to be very exciting to see how it goes. It's weird to just talk to a camera, but we'll see. I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. Again, any questions at all, just let me know and I'll do my best. Okay, I'm going to switch this around here. So we'll move down to this. This is my desk. I hope you can hear me all right. If you can't, type a note and let me know. So here's the supplies that we'll be using. This obviously is the one that I've already painted. If you look at my recent post on Facebook, I put a few reference guides on there. So this piece would be for you to trace if you prefer tracing instead of drawing. And then this is the image that I looked at when I drew the image that I posted. So what we've got going on here, I love using Arches watercolor paper. So we'll just take a sheet of that. And then we have my watercolor palette right here. And these are the colors that we'll be using. I really love this brand, American Journey, and I prefer using tubes instead of the little dishes because I get a lot more color out of these. They have more pigment, so they're brighter colors. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit onto my palette here. I usually use fresh colors so that they haven't already been mixed because I paint a lot of different things. Okay, if your caps are ever tight, I like to use this little rubber thing and that helps get my cap off. So we'll get some of that. So this one is phthalo blue. The red is quinacridine red. And then the yellow we'll use is aureolin yellow. And so that's right here. We have aureolin yellow. And I'll actually keep my yellow separate from the other colors because it is the easiest to get dirty. There we go. Okay, so there we have our colors. And then the other thing that we'll use, of course, is water for watercolor. We have plenty of that. I love mechanical pencils for drawing. And then we'll use a couple brushes. This is the number 6. I recommend that one, but I also love using these two. This is my silver black brush right here, and this is my Isabey brush, and so I love using those as well. Okay, so before we get started, just in case you haven't done watercolor before, I'm going to demonstrate the two techniques that we'll be using. So I have this little scratch piece of paper here. All right, and then the first technique is called a wash. And so a wash is just where, well, there's 3 different types, but one of them is where you get the paper all wet first. The pigment will run wherever the water is. And so wherever you have water, that's where it'll go. So you gotta be careful where you put your water. I'm gonna pick up some color here and drop it in, and that's a wash. You just drop it in and it'll go wherever the water is, and you can push it out all over the place. Another type of wash is where you just go right in with color without doing any water beforehand. We'll primarily be using this first one. Okay. And the reason I have 2 jars of water here is because one I like to use for my dirty water and one is for my clean water. I also use I use toilet paper instead of tissues because it's very handy, and I promise I haven't been hoarding it. Okay. And then the second technique that we'll be using here is called a bloom. Blooms are super fun, but they totally depend on how wet your water is. And by the way, you can always tell where your water is by looking at that shiny part on your paper. So whatever's shiny is where the water is. So I'm going to take a little color here and we'll put that in there. To make a bloom, which is this texture right here. All these little textures are called blooms. So to make that, your water needs to be slightly dry, but not all the way dry. So it's a little tricky to figure that out, but yeah, I'm sure you'll get the hang of it pretty quick. Okay, so we'll let that dry for just a second, and when the shine has gone down just a little bit, you'll be able to tell. That one I could put a bloom in because the water's almost all dry. And a bloom is just when you put just a little drop of water in there, and that's what makes it. All those fun little textures just come from a drop of water. Watercolor is really cool, I think, because in a way it just paints itself. So you're really just moving the paint around and then the water's doing all the work. So we'll let that dry a tad more before I put a bloom in. Maybe add a bit more color. So the phthalo blue and the quinacridine red together make this lovely purple that I have here. And you can totally just mess around with these blooms to find out when the best time is to put that water in. But this whole thing is primarily all blooms, so we have a lot of time to learn and experiment with it. Okay. So again, you just get a bit of clean water. Here's my clean water dish. Dip that in. And you can go right in, and there's a bloom. Move this down here so you can see. And we'll put in another clean water, and you've got a bloom. And you can just keep going with that. It's pretty crazy. It's probably one of my most favorite watercolor techniques. Alright, so now that you've got that, I'll set this aside and we'll take our actual piece of paper here. And I am making these, or this one in particular, at an 8 inch by 10 inch size. 8 by 10 is a standard American frame size, so it's very easy to find a frame for your painting when it's 8 by 10. So I've got my ruler here, and I'm going to mark out where I want to put this. I'm going to put it right in the middle of my paper. And I'll take this bottom section, and I'm just going to mark these. I don't need to actually draw them out because I'm just marking them to put my tape down. Okay, and we'll do that. I think arches must do their paper at European sizes because it's never quite close to what I want it to be for an American size. Okay, so we've got our tape here, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to mark the edges of my 8 by 10. So we are coming to this little mark, and we'll meet over at that mark and spread it out. The tape is for two reasons. One is so that I will have a nice sharp line when I finish my painting. It makes it look more professional that way, and it also just keeps my color in the lines. And then the second reason that a lot of watercolor artists use tape is they tape their paintings to a board, because when you paint on your paper with water, you'll notice that the paper tends to wrinkle a lot. And that's because the fibers are kind of like wood, and so they are very porous and they stretch, and so it always makes that ripple effect. So taping it to a board helps minimize that. Okay, so we've got that section taped down, and we've got one more side we'll tape down. Alright. Now if you have the reference photo, you can use that to draw your succulent, or you can trace the one that I provided in the very last post that I did on Facebook. So you can take a look at that if you want to. What I'll be using is this photo. So I'll just prep that up for me to look at, and there's a copy of it in the comments on my last post if you want to look at it as well. Or you can just follow along. So I want the very, very center of my succulent to be in the very, very center of my painting here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark where the center is. Okay, so here's my center, right in the very middle. And I'm just going to draw it out. I have a tendency to get very quiet when I'm concentrated, so I'll try to not do that for this, but we'll see. So when I'm drawing this, I'm mostly just looking at the outlines of these, and I'm drawing the outlines all the way around these edges here. And I can kind of measure with my eye where everything goes. Like, I know that the distance between this and this is just a little bit more than this. So I'm just kind of measuring as I go along. And I'm not being too particular on being perfectly accurate. There's no reason it needs to be very accurate. Then later, when I go in and paint this, I'll be keeping a few, these little highlights, I'll leave those white. So these little sections that have been lit up, I'll leave those white when I'm painting it. And that'll add some interest and some texture. The other thing that I'm trying to be very careful as I do this is draw very lightly. When I paint, I don't want my pencil markings to show, so I'm trying to be very careful as I draw this that all my marks are very light. Of course, I can always go in with an eraser, and I often do, but it still helps because an eraser doesn't always get everything off. The other thing is you can totally use your imagination. You can put in some extra leaves if you feel like your thing needs an extra leaf or whatever. I'm not actually sure what these things are called, leaves or what, I don't know. I've never actually grown a succulent, but they definitely have a lot of pretty colors. They're fun to look at. Okay, just about have enough lines here to get me going. So there we are. We have our succulent all drawn. Okay. And if you want to get rid of any lines or make them lighter, I love these little kneaded erasers. They're awesome because you can just pick up the color here instead of really driving your eraser in like some. So it's very gentle, and I like that because the watercolor paper is extremely sensitive, and if you kind of mess up the pores on it, the water will interact differently on the paper. Same with when you rub your hands on the paper. That gets oils on the paper, and oil and water don't mix. So it's important to keep your hands off the paper as much as possible. That's why if you ever watch my Instagram stories, you'll see like lots of papers over parts. That's to prevent my skin from touching the paper. So I think we're ready to go ahead and start painting this. I'm going to take a look at these colors here. The middle of this is more pink than the outer part. The outer part has more greens and more blues, and then this middle part has lots of violets. So when I'm mixing my colors, I'll keep that in mind. Okay, so I have my number 6 brush here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a wash on one of these. I'm going to call them petals, whatever they are. And keeping in mind that the water will go, or the pigment will go wherever the water is, I'm not going to make my water go to the very edge of these petals. I'm just going to fill it in just part of the way. Maybe you can see that, where it's shiny. Okay. I'm going to take some color. I want a little more of a pinky color, and I can always test my color on my little scratch piece of paper to see if it's the color that I want. So that's a nice pinky rose color. I think I want it a little bit more pinky for the inside. And then here we go. We're just going to drop that in and let it float around. I think it's so beautiful how watercolor does that. It's so fun to watch the color just interact with the water. Okay. I add a touch more blue closer to the inner side. Okay. Another thing I'll use my towels here for. I often wipe my brush before I go into the water. That just helps get the pigment off when it's loaded. Put some more in here. Okay. Now I'm going to let that dry just ever so slightly before I put my blooms in. While that one's drying, I'll go ahead and start this one. I'll get some water in here. This is really good practice because it's essentially the same technique over and over and over again for each of these little petals. Okay. And since we're still kind of close to the middle, I'm going to keep this still on the pinkier side. How wet my brush is will affect how wet the water is when it hits the paper. So when I'm doing smaller details, I don't usually want it too wet. And that's why I keep wiping it on this. Okay, and this should be dry enough now. So now I'm going to take a bit of fresh water and drop in a few blooms. There we go. How fun. It's almost like little fireworks. can just do that as many times as you feel like. And this one may be ready as well now. We'll check it. And it's still a little bit wet, but not too bad. We'll just go in. There we go. And then obviously you just keep repeating this until all the petals are finished. So we'll go on to this one here in the middle. We've just got some fresh clean water first, and then we'll drop in some color. I'm still in the center, so I've still got pink on my mind. When I get closer out, I'll show you what I do to mix the colors for the outside. It's pretty fun to just drop the paint in here because it really just mixes itself once I put it on the paper. So the more pigment you have on your brush, the brighter your colors will be, and then if you want them to be lighter, you can just add some water to them. I'm wanting some pretty bright colors here so that my blooms show up nicely, because the bloom adds water, and the water lightens it, so I want it to be quite bright at first. Okay, so we'll just let that do its thing for a bit, and we'll move on to another little piece while it's drying. I'm not going to do this yet because I don't want the water to touch. If the water touches that petal, then it will run. The water and pigment will run together, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to go to this petal up here. Make sure you can see. Okay. Oh, hi Sierra. So glad you joined. Okay. We've got this one. Just putting pure water on here. Okay. And now we're getting closer to the outside, so now I'm thinking more purple color. So I'm going to get some more blue in with my quinacridine red. Go in there. And maybe a little more pinker as I get closer to the inside. Okay. I don't know if you can hear the thunder outside my window or not. I'm so excited about monsoons. They've got to be probably my favorite time of the year. I just love the smell of rain, especially in Arizona. It doesn't really smell the same in other parts of the US or Europe or wherever I've been. It's very unique here in Arizona. Okay. Oh, this looks like it might be drying. I'm going to quickly add some blooms in there. There we go. I'll finish this piece up. Okay, so I'll wait for that to just ever so slightly dry a bit, and then I'll come in and add some blooms. I think I'll move to this piece next. So we've got our clean water again, which is not quite so clean because my brush is slight bit of pigment on it. That's okay. So I'm just filling in exactly wherever I want the pigment to go. You can see it's all shiny, and that is shiny as well because it's wet. You can pretty much tell how wet something is just by how shiny it is. I'll drop some pink in, get a bit of purple. You don't really have to follow the colors that I'm using. Obviously, you can use whatever colors you want. It's your painting. I'm just using these ones because they're kind of similar to the photo that I'm looking at. I also chose these colors because they're all on the cooler spectrum. There's warm reds and cool reds, warm yellows, warm blues, and cool yellows. And I didn't really want my colors to look very muddy, so I chose colors that are all on the same spectrum. They're all on the cooler side. And that means they all have a bit of a bluish undertone. Okay, now that is getting a bit more dry, so I'm going to go in and add my blues. Get some clean water here. Here we go. It's so cool to watch that. I just never get tired of it. Too fun. There we go. Okay. I think I can do that middle one now. I'll go ahead and add some water here. Okay. I really am loading my brush up with quite a bit of pigment because I really want that to be pretty vibrant. Okay, that's dry enough for blooms now. So we'll go ahead and go in with some water. There we go. It's very interesting how it works differently. This side of the petal is more wet, so it's not as distinct, but that side was more dry, so you can see them a little better. Okay, we'll go in there. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to do this little piece right here. Because it's so little, I'm just going right in with my brush instead of putting some pure water on first. You can do it either way. Time to change my towel here. It's all full of color. Okay. some water in that one. There. I'm going to this little tiny piece. If you have pencil lines that are still showing up, you can just wait until the painting's all dry, and then you can go in and erase them. It's no big deal. As long as you don't get water on them, they're pretty easy to erase still. Okay, those little pieces. Go into this one, add some blues. Yeah, that was still a little too wet, so the blooms aren't showing up very well. Okay, I'm going to move on to this outer part here. This outer part has a lot more blue in it, so I'll be using less of the pink now. There we go. So cool. I just love watching the water, well, the pigments spill out into the water and see all those little shapes that it makes. It's so, so pretty. Before this is completely dry, I want to try and get those blooms a little brighter. Yeah, that's better. There's that one. Oh, and there's actually two little pieces right here. Add another leaf right here. There. Okay. So while this one is drying, I'm going to go ahead and start on this next one right here. And this one has a tad bit of green in it. So we're getting really close to the edge. And so I'm going to take some of my quinacridine, well, my phthalo blue, a tad bit of the quinacridine red because it's more of a grade green, and then mix that with my yellow here. Creates a really, really, really rich green without the red. I don't want it quite that rich, so I'm picking up a little more of the red and that'll gray it down. There. Pretty much just dropping color in here and letting it do its thing. It's pretty fun to watch. blues into this piece. And you can kind of see it's starting to take its shape now. We at least have some center here. Okay. I want a really dark color for this back part, so I want a lot of color back in here. So I'll just mix all three colors to get my nice dark color in here. And I've got to hurry up before those other pieces dry. I can't make blooms when the water has dried, so I really have to just keep moving along. The water doesn't really wait for you. See, that part has already dried. There we go. Got those ones in. Okay. Get some fresh clean water. Now after this big huge piece. It's a bigger piece, so I really want to make sure I put my water down first so that the colors will all blend and so that nothing dries before I put it in. There we go. Okay, that's all wet. And this is definitely a more purpley piece, so we'll stick lots of purple on there. I probably don't need it that dark, but that's okay. The more I spread this out, the lighter it will get. And I can always add more water too. So I'm kind of just helping the water move along. It definitely does a lot of moving on its own. And I'm just pushing it around. In a nice way. Okay, and that piece is just about dry, so I'm going to stick my blooms in before it's all dry. I missed this part, but that's okay. It's all background work anyways. It's not as important as the others. Can even add a tad bit of green to the edge. Some grayed out. Okay, there's that one. I'll let that dry just a bit. I'll move down to this one. And this one also has a bit more purple, especially toward the center. So I'll drop that in there. A little more pink here. I try to mix most of my colors on my palette, but sometimes I do it on the paper, and that's just fine. I know some watercolor artists feel that the whole magic is right here on the palette. I don't know. I find that it works just fine both ways. We'll let that one dry a bit while we go back to the other one. Drop in our blues. Okay. We'll move over to this big old section. I'm actually going to divide it up. That should be a leaf. Okay. Make sure you can see. So I just keep leaving part of that leaf or petal or whatever without water so that it stays white. Okay. And this one definitely has a lot more green to it. So we'll pick up my palette again and take some blue over to my yellow. Drop some of that in there. It's really, really bright until I add the purple in, and then it's grayed down. Phthalo blue is a staining color, so you'll really want to make sure that you keep it away from your clothes if you're wearing white or something like that. But quinacridine red and aureolin yellow are not, so they're not as likely to leave bright stains. That's nice. Okay. Drop some water in here. And there's our blooms. Okay, move back to this piece. So as I'm mixing these colors, I'm only moving the brush in similar directions as I would on the paper. And that's because I don't want to ruin the brush hairs. If I kind of just pushed it straight down, that would ruin the brush hairs. And so that's why I keep mixing in circles. It's because it's a little better for the brush hairs to do that. Now we'll go into this part, back over to this one, add our blues. There we go, there's that. It's really coming together, almost done. This is a smaller piece, a smaller section, so I don't need to put the water down first. I'm not worried that I won't paint quick enough before the water will dry. Okay. This one's really quite cool. It has so many colors in it and you can really see them. Okay, just add all these little drops in. There we go. This one's not quite dried enough yet, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. I'll do this petal. Okay, I think I can go back to here and we'll add some blooms in now. Still a tad wet, but that's okay. Again, it's on the edge, so it doesn't matter that much. It's more background. Okay, move on to this outer one. If your water is ever so wet that you want to pick it up, you can just get your brush all dry and then pick up the water, and then that'll make it a little drier. Sometimes I do that if I put a little too much water down. quickly go back here and add in some blooms. There we go. And we'll go in, where's my eraser? Oh, behind my water. Okay, got a little piece of graphite right there that I want to pick up. Okay, we'll go into this leaf. I'm getting closer to the middle again, so I'm going to go for more of the pink tones. And then towards the outer part, we'll go more purple. And then in the middle, it'll just run together and blend. There we go. Okay, come back to this one, drop in the blooms. I'm sure you've got the rhythm by now. Pretty much same thing over and over again. This one was very wet, so the blooms aren't showing up quite as much as some of these others. So I'll actually wait a bit before I go into that one. Okay, get in here. Okay. Move on to this one. Make sure you can see. Okay. all wet. So we'll drop in some color. This one's an interesting mixture. I think it's got a bit of all the colors, really. Got a bit of violet here on the edges. Put some green up here. There we go. Okay, kind of come back to this one. Drop in those blooms. Okay. We're moving around. I'm just going to split that up into two. Okay, I want this to be real dark. So I'm going to put lots of pigment on. I'll use all three colors. When I mix all three, then I get a color that's pretty close to black. Not quite. It's just a really dark gray. But it's pretty darn close. There we go. The darker the colors, the more the white will really pop out. There we go. Almost like this one, better than the first example that I did. Some of these colors are turning out really interesting. Okay, so this one's all filled in with water. So we'll go ahead and drop the pigment in. We're going for a little more purple here because we're getting closer to the center again. Pick that up off here. Okay. I think we'll add a little more of the quinacridine red to the edges here. There we go. I'll go back to this corner. See if you can see it going back here. And I'll add in, I kind of want to make those a little more bright. And there's our blooms. I can go back into this one too and make these a little brighter. Okay, there we go. We'll go for that little piece now. which is quite green, I think. Since it's little, I'm just going to go straight in. I'm not going to really bother to do the water first. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna go back into this one. We'll add those blooms. So fun. I just really love watching those. A little more blue there. Okay, we'll move on to the one right next to that. It's bigger, so I'm going to do some water beforehand, just to make sure my colors all run smoothly together and don't dry up halfway through. Alright, this is kind of a big one, so we've got kind of all of the colors in here. We've got more of the purple towards the center, and more of the green towards the outer part. Okay, now this part's drying, and one part is drying even faster than the other, so I really want to get back over there so I can drop my blooms in. So I'll quickly finish this piece. We'll get over there. Okay, got just our plain pure water, and we're dropping them in. So cool. There we go. And we've got our blooms for that part. Okay, we'll move back over here. Plain water first. Okay, and now we'll add our pigment. I'm going for more of the purple hues for this part, and then we'll move out toward the green. Okay, there's that one. And then we'll come back over to here and we'll drop in our blooms. Just plain fresh water, and there it goes. I can even still go back into that one because it's still a little wet. is still too wet to put my blooms in. So I'm going to go ahead and move to this very outer leaf right here. Drop in our water. Okay, that's pretty much done. Now we'll add the blooms to this one. There we go. This section is a little more wet, so I'm still going to wait on that part before I add my blooms. Go into that little tiny section right here. I'm going to make it pretty dark. And what do we do when we want it dark? We want all the colors in there. There we go. Wait for that piece to dry. And we only have one more petal left. Crazy. Okay. I'll just make it a bit bluish and violet. Okay. There we go. I'll leave that. We'll come over to this corner here. We'll drop in our blooms. And this piece is also a bit drier now, so we can finish that one up too. Okay. All right. Those are still a bit too wet. Now, if you want to add some shadows in underneath some of these petals, you can just take some plain fresh water that's all clean, go in, go over the part that you already painted, and as long as you're painting light, it's not going to pick up any of your color, so you can just go right over it. And this is called glazing in watercolor. It's really cool because you can do a lot of fun techniques with it. And then after you've got that wet, you can come back in, pick up some color, and then go in and add a shadow underneath. Here we are. And now you have a shadow right there. And you can do that on all of them if you like, or just the center ones. I'll just do it on a few and call it good. I have just these few center ones. So just some plain fresh water. It's all clean. Go in, we'll pick up, I'm just doing a darker version of violet. You can do a bit of green too, and that'll make it really pop out like this one. And it'll pop out because green is the complementary to red, and so in color theory, the shadow should be green for this, and that'll really make it pop out. There. Really gives it a bit more of a three-dimensional look. I just do 2 more shadows and then we'll call this one done. That's nice. Gonna do one right under there. You don't have to put water over the whole entire thing. You can just put it in the general area that you want your shadow, but make sure you leave a bit of room for the water to flow out and make that smooth gradient. There. And you can add shadows to all of them if you want to. I'm just doing these few just to give the center ones a bit of extra. But there we have it. So if you were painting along, feel free to post your paintings in the comments. I'd love to see them. Otherwise, that is our painting. Don't forget to add your signature somewhere. You should be very proud of yourself. And thanks again for joining. There we have our whole painting. So fun. Let me see if I can zoom out so you can see a little better. We've got it right there. Okay. I'll turn this around. All right. Well, thank you again so much for joining me and for painting with me. That was so fun. I really love painting with people. I'll probably be doing another one of these sometime in August. So if you don't already, go ahead and follow Shalom's Art on Instagram or Facebook so that you'll get the notifications for that. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining, and I'll see you again later. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.